Okay, so I'm doing a video that I've done several times before, but it was really more specific to when I taught algebra. So this one I'm doing, and I'm trying to make it a little more specific to geometry, but it's still the same concept. All revolves around what exactly is a variable. And typically I get all kind of answers like, oh, well, it's a letter, or it's the answer, it's what you're trying to solve for. And we do represent a variable typically with a letter, and sometimes we are able to solve for it, but that's not what a variable is. A variable is an unknown number. That's why we use a letter, because we don't know what number it is. So we could it's basically the same thing as a question mark. We just don't know what the number is yet. So again, variable is an unknown number. That's the first thing. Unknown number. Now, in geometry, we're going to do a lot of problems where we don't know the measure of something, like the measure of an angle or how long a line segment is, or what the perimeter, like could be a million things, could be what the perimeter of a shape is. So we're going to sometimes be able to solve for that because we're going to be given enough information to set up an equation and then solve for the unknown for the variable, which will then allow us to solve for the measure of the other like information we're trying to find. But again, it all comes from the fact that a variable is just an unknown number. So let's look at a word problem. Again, this doesn't really have any, I should have done one related to geometry probably, but so John weighs 10 pounds more than 2 times Isaiah's weight. Again, we don't know either of their weights. So we could still create an equation or an expression, really, not an equation yet. And we can say, okay, well, I don't know John's weight, so I'm just gonna make John's weight an unknown variable, right? John's weight is gonna be X. I don't know how much he weighs, so I'm just gonna make it a variable. Well, Isaiah, same thing. I don't know how much Isaiah weighs, so I'm just gonna make that a variable. Why? That is accurate. The problem with that is if we have two variables, I can't solve anything if I get more information. Like, for example, maybe they tell me, and John's weight plus Isaiah's weight, or their total weight, is 160 pounds, we'll say. So their weight added together is 160 pounds. So X plus Y equals 160. Well, I cannot solve an equation. This is another little algebra thing for you. I cannot solve an equation if I have two variables in it. That's too many unknowns. I can only have one variable if I only have one equation. So with that in mind, I'd like to, if possible, just use one variable, and then I would be able to solve this equation down below. I'm going to get rid of that equation for now. So let's think about what's going on. So as you will find out in class, and I'm sure I'll say it a lot in class, lucky for you guys, you have a teacher that is an amazing artist. So it's going to help you visually in geometry. So just really quickly, I want to think about who is heavier. Well, John weighs 10 pounds more than 2 times Isaiah's weight. So John's a lot heavier. Maybe he's a much bigger guy. So we'll draw John as a much bigger guy. Like I said, amazing artist. And so that's John. And then we have Isaiah, that maybe Isaiah is even a younger kid or something like that, and John's an adult. So Isaiah over here is smaller. Oops, I don't know why that didn't draw a circle. There you go. So amazing artist. So now, oh, that's Isaiah. So again, I could just write X and Y for their weight, but that wouldn't allow me to solve it. But I do have some other information that I can use, and this is exactly what you'll do with geometry problems. So I still want to do all of that. I know that John weighs 10 pounds more than 2 times Isaiah's weight. So now let's say I'm going to start with Isaiah's weight. And I'm going to create equations, or really they're not equations, they're expressions at this point, but you can think of them as equations, that's fine. I know Isaiah's smaller, and I'm going to need to do something to Isaiah's weight to get to John's weight. And what I do is that yellow part, that yellow highlighted part. So if Isaiah is X pounds, all I have to do is say, okay, well, I know that John is 10 pounds more. Ignore the red lines down there. 10 pounds more, so I'd be adding 10 to something. So 10 pounds more than 2. And when it says 2 times Isaiah's weight, that means 2 times X, which we write as just 2X. So again, that's algebra stuff you're supposed to already know. 2X means 2 times X. Why is that not writing? Oh, what's going on with my screen here? So that is John's weight. And we've only used one variable now. We've compared basically John to Isaiah so that we could just use Isaiah's weight, which is X, the unknown, in order to create an expression that also reflects John's weight. But here's, and again, if you're a little lost on how I created it, that's not the point of the video. The point of the video is those are just numbers. What I circled are just numbers. We don't know what the number is. In this case, it's only a variable, so it's only an unknown. In this case, part of the number is unknown, so therefore we can't figure out the entire number, the whole weight of John. But when you see these little mini expressions in geometry, which you will in pretty much every single lesson, just understand, okay, all that is, it's just a number. Part of that number is missing, so therefore I can't tell you what the total number is. Just a real quick example. Let's say we had red and blue marbles. And I told you, I really shouldn't. Actually, I'm not even because I need an unknown. Let's say I have a bag of marbles. And I tell you that there's, well, in the bag, there's 10 blue marbles. And I ask you how many total marbles there are. Well, you can't tell me because part of the total is unknown. The red is an unknown number. So you can't tell me the total if you don't know a part of that total, if a part of that total is unknown. That's kind of what this is right here. You can't tell me the total of John's weight if you don't know Isaiah's weight. If a part of John's total weight is unknown, you can't tell me what it is. So if part of any larger number is unknown, you can't tell me what that larger number is. So the way that's going to work in geometry, and then you'd get more information typically, and you'd be able to actually solve. But the way that works, I'm going to actually get rid of all of that instead of drawing. Is we're going to have things like line segments and angles, and you're going to have information about each of them. And it might tell you, well, over here, this line segment is 4. Oh, I didn't want to read that. Let's get rid of that. This line segment over here is 4x plus 3. And then this line segment over here is 10x subtract 12. Don't freak out and say, well, wait a minute, how in the world could that be possible? And maybe they even tell you the line segments are equal. Maybe something like that. They say, well, you have 2 congruent line segments. Congruent means equal. So those are pretty close to equal. And you're like, well, wait a minute, how in the world can that be equal? How can this 4x plus 3 be equal to 10x plus 12? I mean, over here, I got a 4 and I got a 3 and I got addition, and over here I got a 10 and I got subtraction and I got 12. All those are just calculations. X, by the way, is always the same. If X is in any equation or any problem multiple times, it's always going to represent the same number. So all it means is over here on the left, I'm going to multiply some number times 4, and I'm going to add to that 3. And over here, I'm going to take that same number and multiply it times 10. 10x means 10 times x. If you didn't know that. Hope that's 10 times x. let's go back. 10x is the same thing as 10 times x. So I'd multiply it times the x, and then I would subtract 12 over here. But in either case, after I do that math, after I do all that math, and after I do all that math, if I can solve for x, then I would get the same number if I knew those two red lines were the same number at the beginning. Same way, you'll see the same thing in angles. I'm not going to go through it again, but you might have 3x subtract 4, and over here you might have 5x plus 8, and you might have to use some kind of information to solve. But those are just numbers. That is some number. That is some number. We can't figure it out, though, because we don't know part of the number to be able to figure out the whole number. Last thing I'll mention to you is just something I do in class over and over again. We can have different representations of any number. So I normally do this in class with a bunch of kids, and I say, we could all have $20 in our pocket right now. But we could have it 20 different ways. One person might have $21 bills. One person might have two tens. One person might have 120. One person might have two fives and a 10. And we could keep going forever and create 20 different versions of the number 20 using different math. It's still $20. And that's what all this boils down to. When you have quantities, they're just some, I didn't mean to say that. When you have quantities and you have numbers, they're just numbers. If you don't know exactly what that number is, and instead you have some kind of an expression like down here, don't freak out and get confused by all the fives and x's and fours and eights and subtractions. It's just a number, and part of that number is unknown. So we can't do anything yet, but hopefully they give us more information, and that's when we can solve for the variable, set up an equation and solve for the variable. And then if we can solve for the variable, then we can plug that variable in. So I would plug that in for x. And once I plug it in for x, that's when I can solve for this entire expression and figure out what is the measure of the angle, or what is the length of the line, so something like that. So we'll go over that a lot in class, but I'm going to have you guys watch this before we ever start talking about it. So hopefully it's easier to pick up in class.